So in this section we are going to take two things. We are going to look at a few IP analytics topics, and then we are going to, it's just a quick overview, and then a method which Ashley follows called the first look method for technology assessment. So I'll try and keep mine a little fast paced so that you can also hear Ashley out. In between there are a couple of case studies which Vidula, I've requested her to show you as examples of what is meant by some of those. How many of you actually do your IP analytics? Do you do your own patentability assessments? Right. So you're familiar with those. FTOs anybody has done or got done? You do, okay. So some of you are aware of those, and we'll see how we can cover this. Yeah, okay. All of you are familiar with IP, I don't have to spend time, but broadly there are multiple varieties of IP, right? And it's important to understand that when we are in practice building, planning the protection for whatever you are doing, there might be multiple IPs involved, it's not just one. So something like a trade secret, right? There's no formal registration over there, but you protect it through some of the agreements that you sign, right? On the other hand, the patent means that there's a public disclosure, okay? So the reason I'm pointing this out is that sometimes your scientists may have a know-how package, okay, which they are willing to offer to somebody. There might be some elements which are patented, some other elements which are not, right? And those will be of a trade secret nature, let us say. Now, if you are claiming that that is not known to everybody else, right, in which case when you give your technology package, it contains a part which is a trade secret. Now, if the scientist publishes it, okay, it's no more a trade secret, okay. So it has to be clear to your scientists that that is something which they have to be very clear about. Now, the other way of looking at it, which most US universities will do, is they are only dealing with IP, which is formal IP like patents, right? Trade secrets are not part of the deal, okay. It's essentially it's IP rights that are being transacted, not know-how per se, okay. So I think I'll leave this out for a moment. There are multiple reports that are done in order to aid with decision making. So here is a list of some of them, and you can also see that I have put a question in front of it, right. So that's the question that the report addresses. So just think of it this way, that every report or analytics that you are doing must address and give you a clear answer to a clear question, right. So what is that question basically that's being asked, and are you answering that or not? Why I am pointing this out is many people do all these searches, and at the end of it most people feel it's useless because it doesn't give you any definitive answer for the question at hand, okay. So then it just becomes junk that's being added by people. So you have to be careful that that doesn't happen. There should be some insight being provided. Patentability assessments are basically asking the question, is this patentable as per the law, right, of a particular region. So it's region specific also, right, because there are different things which are allowed or disallowed in different laws, right, and these have their own limitations also, okay, which I'll come back to. FTOs, what is the question they are asking, right? The FTOs, the question that's being asked is, can I practice this know-how freely in say a region X, right? Please note I am using the word know-how right here, I didn't say a patent, right, because at the end of the day a company wishes to use a piece of know-how to say make a product, a part of it is covered by the patent, right, but what if another part which is not covered by your patent is still protected by somebody else? You have a problem, right. So the FTO usually applies to the whole knowledge package or technology needed to really work that particular idea and not only to that particular patent. Patent might be narrower in scope. Okay? So, keep that in mind as well. Then there are patent landscapes, white space analysis. When one is talking about infringement assessments, one is then having a patent in hand which you are assessing, right. It could be somebody else's patent, whether it is say infringing, upon what you are doing. That could be the kind of question that you are asking as well. Sometimes you need to do citation analysis to understand who all are active in that space, is this patent important or not in the field, and so on. There can be competition assessments looking at different parties where they are filing patents and so on. There could be state of art reports. Your own portfolio, you will have either your portfolio or a portfolio of say even a competitor. You might collect all the patents and do an analysis of it, right. See what are the domains they are filing, how old are they, is it something which in which parts they are strong, which parts they are not. So imagine even if it is two companies and one is evaluating the other for acquisitions, they may look at the portfolios and see whether there is complementarity in it, right. So during some years back, when there was busy buying of patent portfolios by all the phone companies, right, there were, you must be aware, you must have seen in the news like Nokia's patent portfolio, or so the phone companies, the camera companies, right, and all of these are busy trading, right. They were looking for portfolios to hold where they could fill up certain spaces, either to block their competitors or to create space for themselves so that others do not block them out of it. For example, Google was a new entrant in that space, right, and they needed to create space for themselves, which otherwise they would have got blocked out of, right. The other thing you might do is an IP audit, which is you have your patent portfolio as an institution, you take a view on various goals, whether in terms of whether what you should be pruning, what you should be retaining, all of those kind of analysis that you do as well. Okay. Stop, feel free to ask questions, you can stop in between. Let us talk a little bit about FTO. So if your one of the things which many of you might have to explain to your scientists and inventors is that even if you are not filing a patent, you need to do an FTO, or at least have a sense of whether you have freedom to operate or not, right. So not being aware of patents is definitely not acceptable for anybody who is developing a technology. You do not want to find out after 5 years of hard work that it is all protected by somebody else, right. So the freedom to operate assessment is something which is irrespective of whether you are filing a patent or not. You need to know whether you can practice this or your licensee can practice it or not. That said, you may not give that assurance to your licensee. Okay, you may not, you will not tell the licensee that, look, I am assuring you it is free to operate, because there are legal consequences of that, and all of these assessments have their weaknesses, right. But you will do it for yourself in order to understand what is your negotiating position, right, in terms of how strong is your case, right. Now today many people are also, besides the typical discussions between licensee and licensor, that these conversations happen, today investors look at it, right. In fact, for BIRAC BIG, BIRAC asks for at least a preliminary FTO, right. So you have to be aware of these kind of points as well, that people need to have freedom to operate. Okay. Okay. In patentability assessments, it's slightly different. Here you are checking typically across, suppose whenever you are doing a search, the typical search involves these criteria, right. One is whether it's novel, that means nobody has done the same thing anywhere in the world, not just local. Non-obvious is a little more not so clear a term, but essentially it refers to that if you took all the parts and you could put it together, right, is it obvious to somebody who is reasonably trained in the art. Okay. if say you assemble something and nobody anticipated this in the past, it's a good indicator that it could be non-obvious. If you assemble something and it resulted in something surprising, then it's a good indicator that it is non-obvious, right? So this was not expected, we got this, right? As you can understand, this is not just about the data, it's also a little bit of storytelling, okay, for you. So when we are assessing patents and you get replies, we don't take the non-obviousness part that seriously from the examiner, okay, because we always think we can argue that. Novelty is a little harder to defend against, okay. Okay, usefulness most of us will be able to do. The next on the list is that it is not in the exclusion list of the patent law, right. It should not be in the exclusion list. That means these are, so and so and so and so are not allowed for patenting in India, for example. That list it should not be there. Now this clearly is dependent upon the law of the whichever law you are dealing with. So this differs. What is patentable in India, what is not patentable in India may be patentable in the US. Okay. So I often see people rush to the conclusion and tell inventors this is not patentable, right. But the inventor, I mean, he might have done a search, he will come back and say, oh, if Google could do it, why you can't do it, that is the kind of question you will get from people as well. One has to understand that you can always write it up, that this particular claim may not get accepted in India, but it will get accepted elsewhere, that is also okay, right. And sometimes that is a good thing to do to get the provisional date, okay, at least the provisional filing date for India, okay. So don't go on a single track kind of a process. Okay, so one of the important things for many of us is to first understand all the inventions very clearly, and that takes a lot of effort. It also is important to understand when a scientist is speaking, I will speak to you later about some of this, but they will talk more about the technical details, but you need to understand what is the problem that is being solved. So we typically first translate that language into a problem solution approach, okay. That is the first thing we do, that is, oh, all this you have done, okay, let us now understand which problem you are solving, okay, and then find out what is the solution over there, right. Okay. We also prefer, by the way, a lot of people do patentability assessments which we do not like because it is too cluttered, does not give you the insights that you want, okay. So we typically tend to also draft claims, okay. The claims, it should be claims before searching, okay. So draft some rough claims, right, it need not be exact, but at least you should know what claims you are searching for and what would be acceptable or not. And the draft claims, right, is what you will assess, and patentability documents, by the way, should not be seen as written in stone. It is something which allows you to even modify the claims, right. There is nothing that you can change your claims, you can also add extra data which makes it novel or non-obvious or whatever it is, right. So sometimes people just hand out a patentability assessments, no, not patentable, right. That is, inventors hate it, of course, and it is a silly thing to do. Instead, it is better to work on it, you can actually make it work, right. And patentability assessments are not 100% fail proof, that means it is not completely. Anybody wants to comment why? Okay, so he said it is a human process, right. People will have to search, take a decision on it, maybe they are wrong. Anything else?
We might not be able to look at the entire spectrum of patents.
Okay, so may not look at the entire spectrum of patents. Anything else? So they miss out things in the database. Anything else? By the way, remember for these searches you are not just looking at patents, you are looking at entire literature, right, entire even internet's product portfolios, whatever it is, it could be anything, right. Anything else?
Some information not being electronically available.
Okay, so he said some information is not electronically available, right. So you know the example of, so India has a database of traditional knowledge, right, and they make it available to various patent offices. That's because that data was not available digitally with the patent offices around the world before, and therefore grants were given on certain things which are already described 2000 years back in some of our texts. Okay, right? That's an example of it. Anything more? Anything else? Patents don't get published for 18 months. So the last 18 months is not available to you, isn't it? Okay. So anyway, my point is only that be humble with your patentability assessments. They're not fail proof. Okay, fine. So let's take just a quick example here, right? So in this particular case, you can see there's a case here where the first one, if you look at it, there is a base IP. I'm just illustrating FTO out here. There's a base IP, and this is your patent, right? Your patent is a dependent patent. They will give you a patent because it's novel, it's non-obvious, whatever it is, but it's dependent. It's like there's a piece of land belonging to somebody else. You have built a temple on it, right? Is that right or wrong, right? Maybe all the temple, or you landed a temple there, right? You can take a lorry there and make it stand there. You can take the lorry out, but you don't have the permission to keep that lorry in that piece of land, right? So please be clear that your know-how is patentable doesn't mean that it has FTO, right? Now there can be multiple level dependencies also, right? So in this case, for example, we have a case where there is a process, chemical process, which uses a catalyst. Okay, so there's a catalyst. There's a batch process which uses the catalyst to say go from A to B, and a catalyst C. And your inventor has come up with a continuous process, right? Now here I need to look at the continuous process might be your patent, right? Your batch process is expired, okay, and you can freely practice it. Somebody else's patent, so you don't need to take licenses. You can go ahead and do it. But the catalyst is still active. You still need to go and get the permission from the person who has protected the catalyst. Okay? So this is just a simple. Now there are some selected decisions I just want to point you to. One, there are many decisions which a TTO needs to take, and I wonder how you all do it, or how much you have encountered of all these things. One, decisions on inventorship. How many of you deal with it? Okay, so maybe some of you have seen disputes. Yeah, but I hope all of you know that the inventorship is a legal concept. It is not a policy decision. Okay, it's not up to your organization to decide that, it is legally defined. Okay, so you cannot just take an arbitrary view that, oh, these students, we are not including them. If they are inventors, they are inventors. Okay, please remember that. Decisions on ownership. Okay, so in simple cases where you're the institution who's building it, it's easier to understand. But in collaborations, many of you will have to understand how to decide on ownership, right? And what are the terms that guide the ownership of those patents as well. There will be decisions to file IP in India, which might be relatively easier because the costs may not be that high. When it comes to decisions to file in PCT, foreign jurisdictions, you will you'll have processes of your own. Maybe how many of you use committees? All use committees, or some of you have single person taking the decision? Committees? Committees? Okay, so that's usually the kind of norm in India, right? The next question is about how much to invest in IP costs, right? And that's something which is a harder decision, right? How do you support these decisions, by the way? This is where Ashley's FLTA comes in, okay? How do you think through, even whether it's worth investing resources in, and in which way you want to stage your costs. Decisions to maintain or renew IP, right? decisions how much to invest in marketing and lead generation. Marketing will cost you money, either it's in-house or external, it's going to cost you some money to do all of that. Those decisions will also arise. Decisions to say, get some support or, relating to deal structure and commercials, right? What should be the structure of the deal? What should be the commercials, right? Some of you might, most of the time you are probably using standard template agreements, right? And I don't know how you do the number crunching right now, right? It is, from our experience, it's a lot of judgment involved in it. It's not about just eyeballing it, but that's something which is a hard part and hard decision to do. And it becomes harder because you have to deal with your leadership team to, in your organization, you have to worry about audits and so on and so forth when you're thinking through some of those terms as well. And decisions on legal actions, notices, litigations that I think some institutions do, others don't, but these are some important decision points. So when we look at it, we put down a workflow and say where those decision points come and set up mechanisms for each of those, right. So we would like to have a mechanism by which we take this decision with information and not necessarily blindly, okay. There are some other questions which I won't speak much about, but you can have a look through this later, right. There are questions about should you keep it a trade secret, should you file IP and so on and so forth. As a general rule, many of our institutions are actually early stage knowledge creation institutions and dissemination institutions, teaching, research training, publications, all that happens, and people like to talk with everybody else. So as a general rule, right, it's always better, in my opinion, that you file your patent and let people speak freely, right, rather than work with too much of trade secrets, right. But sometimes it is maybe necessary, but that said, it's always better to work with formal IP. It's better in the sense of both for the institution, it also has one more benefit, that the know-how travels with the person. IP is a property of the institution, okay, and that's something which you have to be very clear that that's what is one of the things that's happening when you register formal IP as well. When should you file IP? What do you do? Many of you, how do you go about your filing decisions? How long does it take to file your first filing from the invention disclosure in your institutions? Anybody?
3 months.
3 months?
6 to 8 months.
6 to 8 months? Yeah? Okay. So today, a researcher can just upload a paper and it will be out in 2 weeks. So do you have the luxury of 6 months? Do you have the luxury of 3 months, right? Especially when you cannot really control them. You can't tell them that don't publish it, right? So this process has to be as efficient as possible, right? So some years back, we had in NCL, I had kept the target. This was before, in recent years it's different, but we had kept the target that from the date the invention disclosure happens to getting the filing date of the first patent, right, we should do it under 45 days, right. That's still not good enough, by the way, but what we did was we requested inventors to think about patents much ahead of publications, right, in the sense they don't need as much data. Patents don't require you to describe mechanistic details of why this process works, right. You just have to say, I did this, I got this result, and this is novel and non-obvious. Why do you need all the rest of it? You don't need all that. So can you do it much earlier, and can you accelerate that process to get it to about as fast as possible? So this is so general rule is do file it. Provisional has to capture the scope, right, well enough, and typically usually we insist on one example, okay, but you don't need to have all the examples in place, okay, in a provisional. Okay. Filing prosecution costs, I just wanted to point out a few things. Please understand that the Indian filing costs, the government cost is not much, right. So one of the key mistakes many of us do is that we tend to think of the whole process and think whether this is worth filing or not, right. In the process you do not even end up filing the first one because you are worried about, oh, this has to go to the US, array we have not reached that stage yet, right. So let us take step by step. So first look at the India filing costs, and in CSIR institutions it is done in-house, right, whereas the some of the academic firms might be hiring attorney firms to do it, so cost may be a little higher, but that cost is not as high, right. You can afford to, so my argument is spend only that much time in decision making, right, which is sort of commensurate with the cost. Let it at least advance that far and then you take the decision later, right. So typical process is, if you file, your first task is to just get a priority date, right, with your provisional filing. In 12 months time you need to file your complete specifications, and if you want to go overseas, PCT, as I am just generalizing it, and then in 30 months time you are going in for the US, Europe, whatever it is. Now at least you have 12 months to take a decision on whether it is worth going for a PCT, and you have 30 months to decide whether you want to spend money on US, UEP. So why do you need to take all the decision on day one, right? The second thing that happens is sometimes we irritate the inventors because the inventors are keen to keep moving, right, and what do they have to lose? If you do not do it, they will go and publish it anyway, right. So it is up to you, right, in order to make it as streamlined if you want to increase the number of invention disclosures that come to you. So in NCL around 2008 we changed completely the process, we got rid of the committee okay, because the committees were essentially demoralizing our inventors in my opinion, okay, because they did not read the invention. They would come sit in a senior wise people telling this thing, why is this useful, why is that, no homework done. So we deferred important decisions to a point where really you are spending money, right, rather than in the early stages, and we had a smaller group which was taking that decision itself, okay. Now rushing to a grant is not advantageous in all cases, okay. So people tend to think that, oh, you need to quickly get a grant and it is a good thing, right. Sometimes in that process you compromise on the strength of the claims, okay. You will also compromise, one more thing you are doing is you are speeding up your investment timelines, right. Suppose I go into US within a year, I could have done it in 30 months, so I could have at least had that much time to evaluate how much to invest. By speeding up, what did I gain, right. But there are some cases where you need to speed up, okay. So for example, in the pharma industry sometimes they may see a benefit in you showing a grant, okay, and so on, okay. The other thing which many investors do carefully on startups is the IP due diligence side, but even savvy licensees will do that, right. So you need to be careful about a few things which you take for granted. For example, the ownership rights, right. So ownership rights, the best practice is to keep it as predictable as possible, right. So especially when you are engaging with multiple people, you do not want multiple decision points. So most investors and savvy licensees will run away if you have too many of those joint ownership, okay. They will also not like it if there are multiple people taking decisions, right. And the general story around is that all directors and vice chancellors, just the file sits in the table and they do not take decisions okay. So I am just telling you that that's the way it is looked at. So as a rule, people will want predictable decision making, and that greatly improves the chance of raising money or convincing people in, and I am not joking here. Just recently one of our one of the spinouts from a DST lab, an investor called me up to ask, we have never done a case where there is an institute involved, right. We think people are sloppy, okay. So should we consider it at all? okay, that should we even consider giving the term sheet to an founder who wanted to license from that DST lab, right? That's the, and I had to convince them that look, things are improving, it's all of that is happening, but I can tell you that there is a lot of sloppiness in terms of back and forth and taking quick decisions, closing it and so on and so forth in terms of licensing and giving clear terms without too much confusion, right? Okay, so the people do look at all the agreements that you're, and by the ownership rights are made predictable by those on the top, and exploitation rights, which is different from the ownership rights. You have to be careful about your licensing, option agreements, MTAs, partnership agreements, and anything that you're in licensing, right? For example, open source licenses, okay, are not is not the same as you can do whatever you want. There is a clause which says that you will also open source whatever you build on top of it, okay? So it is not the same as just freely available IP, okay? So I think I will leave this out. A quick couple of things, I think I'm going to run out of time. So in portfolio planning, please remember there are different types of IP, there are different regional coverages. You do portfolio planning for different reasons as well, okay? This I'll leave it out as an example I wanted to give you, but Vidula, maybe you can give a, this is probably Ashley's, right?
Yeah.
Where is Vidula's? Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
So Premnath,
Yeah.
we talked amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
So I just want to show 3 slides in support of what Vidula is going to say. It is a continuation of what I said in the morning. Just 3 slides.
But is there a slide there?
No, I have it here.
No, I think you'll have to help me. Can we use it verbally instead of slides?
I want to show it.
Okay. Can you just put it up? Yeah.
As per the SOP in CSI, we need to submit the IDF to ODIP, and ODIP is taking their own time, like let's say 2 or 3 months.
Don't say that in front of Dr. Hirman. Yeah, sorry. Our decision was to do it ourselves with our own mechanisms. We did not do that because we were not also happy with the fact that we couldn't take a decision with those reports.
See, there are 10 people in your 37 laboratories.
Yeah.
Now everybody bombards with some 30 disclosures. Now how do you handle it? Now there is an organization decision.
Yeah. So see, quite honestly, it has to be done in a more focused manner, and they are shortchanged, right, in terms of number of people available and so on and so forth. So we had a format of our own, right, which we have always shown to the IPU, saying that this is our way of looking at patentability, right, and a similar process we follow here as well. We can share that template with you, you can see, but how to get it done, we had engaged services. And we had said that we wanted like this.
But like there is a very recent audit which happened.
Yeah.
So there was very specific question whether we have done it through ODIP.
Yeah. See, some of these things, if you have, the intention is that you should have done it. That's all, right? Whether you've done it through ODIP or not is not important in my opinion,
But
right?
they said, as per the SOP, they said if you have the ODIP report, then only they will take it further. They will not consider that case at all.
Yeah. So that is something which I know there are issues sometimes over there, but we had convinced them that ours is what we would like to go with, because we had engaged services for that and we had done it as per our requirements. Otherwise, it was difficult for us to take a decision on it, right? And the other thing is, some of these things, as I told you, are iterative, right? Suppose an analyst comes and says that this is not patentable, doesn't mean it's not patentable. Actually, you can change the claims and it might become patentable, right? But we don't have the opportunity of doing so many interactions because they will be short-changed in terms of time, right? And there will be very little people doing so many labs.
Discussion required with scientists and analysts.
Yeah. So that discussion is not possible. So we decided to do it that way. Fortunately, the director of NCL agreed, and that's how we have been doing it in NCL. Yeah.
We also reached that, but let us separate discussion.
Yeah, you have to use a mic quick. Can you take short?
Yeah.
This,
Morning I talked to you about it, carbamate. I told you the later part of the story. This is the front part. This is the chemistry. We will not get into chemistry. A, B, C, you change the A, you get a different product. So the first US patent, we said we are not happy. Second US patent, same thing. Then they did a third process and came to us. And we looked at it. We saw they reached the limits of chemistry. Every science and technology, you will reach some limits. Beyond that, you can't go. So we say, if we are reaching the limits,
like this, because your voice sometimes is very low. So.
if we are reaching the limits, everybody will reach the limits because chemistry is universal. So let us say what everybody else is doing it. Next slide. Next. We looked at it. Already 44 patents were issued. So we say what everybody is doing. Go next. Good. Next slide. You look at each of those multinationals are there. Yeah. And we found people have taken 5 approaches. 44 patents, but there are 5 approaches. We analyzed each approach and found out everybody was reaching the limits of chemistry. Now what do you do? Then what we found out, people started asking fundamental question. Why did accident take place? It took place in MIC tank, water entered. So question is, do you have to store MIC? And a deep thought answer is no. So what people did? In situ generation of isocyanate. As soon as isocyanate gets generated, gets converted. There is no residence time given there at all. That is, people avoided with those changes in the plant. Now, if you do this, then you learn. Or you say you have 1 patent, you have 2 patents. You are happy with that. But what happens in the field, marketplace, what competition is doing, what industry is doing, you don't get to know. And this is not the end of it. I am not saying you stop research. Dr. Sivanova was a member of our patent committee. When we presented the result, because then we found Monsanto taking it for polyurethanes. Other point. That is where the idea of polycarbonate germinated, and the rest is history. The idea of showing this is how patent analytics is important. This is the first time I did it, to tell you very frankly. Till that time I never used to do it. And after that, for me it is a religious affair. Every time I look at a patent. Thank you.
No.
Just try.
There we go. We have liftoff. Good. So I'm going to talk about invention, triage, and selection. In the US, we only file on about half of the the invention disclosures we get. Okay? And so a half, we look at them and say, we don't think this is worth proceeding on. So the problem is academic inventions are embryonic. The technology is unproven and the market demand is unknown. And commercialization is all about risk reduction. The technology evaluation is really the first round of risk reduction you're going to do on a technology. And there will be successive rounds as the technology moves forward. Generally, these successive rounds of risk reduction are tied to license transactions, or particularly if you're giving your technology to a startup, when that startup does rounds of financing. And the foundation of a tech transfer office, I think, is its technology assessment process. All experienced practitioners have some form of technology assessment. I call mine the first look technology assessment. It was based on an approach developed by Brett Cornwall at the IC Squared Institute at the University of Texas, Austin, which he called the quick look, and I took it and adapted it. And I used to teach a course at Osaka University in the summer, and the first week of that course was the students were given a new technology, they were formed into teams, and they would do a first look technology assessment. And I also taught an MBA level class at Boston University, and the first 7 weeks, the students would do a first look technology, well, the first 6 weeks, they do the first look technology assessment, and then the 7th week, they present it to the students, and we invite the tech transfer office and the inventor of the technology. As I said, Brett Cornwall. And Dick Cahoon, he has his own system. He calls it the 10-point technology scoring template, the TST. All these systems attempt to answer 2 questions. 1, how likely are we to get a patent on this technology? And 2, if we do, will anybody care and want it? And a very fundamental relationship is that between value and risk. And as risk goes down, value goes up. And we'll come back and we'll look at this again, I don't know if it's tomorrow or the day after, when we look at valuation. This is a really important concept in looking at that. So the first look technology assessment template is a critical step in the technology transfer process. You need to do it up front. If you don't do it up front, if you take, as somebody attending one of these 2 courses has told me, we file on everything. Well, if you don't, you'll take bad decisions. And if you don't do an analysis, you have no good reason to explain to faculty why you're not going to go ahead. And if you just say, well, no, we don't think we want to do this, they'll get mad at you. And that's not good. If you file on everything, you're really going to kick that decision on what's worth pursuing or not down the road. If the technology is no good, you're going to have to face up to it eventually. And the faculty will be more disappointed if they've put a lot of work into the patenting effort and it hasn't worked than if you told them up front. We once, in this BU class, the 2nd week was devoted to answering the question, could you start a company to develop this technology? Could you, raise the capital, and then could you exit? And one cycle, my partner said, let's look at old technologies and see if the students come to the same conclusion. That might have been naive. You'd like to think that with the internet and some good research, they could probably find what happened. But we took a technology that was a tunable fluorescence. You could change the wavelength at which the dye fluoresced pretty easily. And our photonics center had started a company to develop this, and the application was detecting counterfeit products. And the idea was you would print an invisible code on the label, and when the retailer got the delivery from the wholesaler, they'd have one of these little lamps that would fluoresce at the right frequency, and if they saw the code, it was genuine. If they didn't see the code, it was counterfeit. And the company had been developed for some time, and we invited the professor, and the student's analysis was, you've only got half the answer to the identity counterfeit problem. The market won't pay for much for a partial solution. Don't do it. Well, the professor was sitting right there, and I didn't know their conclusions beforehand, and he's sitting right there and listening to this. And I turned to him after and said, well, Gil, can you give us an update on the company? And he gave us a very nice update, and the company was really beginning to struggle. And then he turned to me and he said, Ashley, I wish somebody had told me this 5 years ago. So killing things up front quickly is better than dragging them out and having an ugly death down the road. So the process, the methodology, report format, ranking methodology, and outcomes. You start with a technology description. You've got to come up with the value proposition, develop a product vision, look at the potential markets, the market interest. These are all the things that can say, yep, this is good. And then you look for things like competing technologies and competitors, barriers to market entry, the development status of the technology, the intellectual property status, and these are all things that can stop it. And then you look at the pathway to market. So you start there, and in real life, this is going to be a never-ending process. And we looked at the market issues in the oops, that was a different course, sorry. It's important to let faculty review the document and the recommendations before you take action. You know, if you have a patent committee that has to approve filing a new patent, some institutions do, before your report goes to the committee, then you've got to let the faculty review it and before it's finalized and issued. You know, and if your answer is no, we don't want to go forward, you've got to let them say, well, you know, you've got to ask them, have I missed something? Did I misunderstand the technology? Did I misunderstand what it could do? Because perhaps you have, and you need to do more work. But if they can't argue with your data or analysis, they're scientists, right? They accept data. If they can't argue with your data or how you analyzed it, they have to buy in to your conclusion. And the way you'll know you've succeeded is if either they come back to you 1 or 2 years later with the same technology, but now much more data, more advanced, and say, hey, I think I fixed some of those issues you found. No, look at it now. Or they come back to you 3 or 4 years later with something new. And they say, look, I understand why the last one wasn't any good. I think this one fixes this problem in these ways. You know, I think this has value. Look at it again. If you reject them once and they come back, then you know you've done a good job in the rejection of them. So, you know, how you do about it? Faculty will have thought through the science. What they propose will be scientifically, technically feasible. But will it be practically feasible? Is there a market? Does the invention fill unmet market needs? Are we going to get patent or other protection? What's the competition? Will it work on a large scale? In Japan, one of the inventions we got was from a scientist who really regretted how the silk industry had moved from Japan to China. And he had come up with some genetically engineered silkworms. And to implement it, you needed to remove the silk gland from each silkworm. That'll work on a lab scale. I'm not sure I saw that working on an industrial scale, you know, with thousands of pounds of silkworms. It just wasn't feasible on a practical scale, but it was perfectly feasible scientifically. Can it be made economically? And what are the regulatory barriers to market entry? And what's the commercial pathway to the market? Step one, you've got to get a complete description of the technology and how the scientists see it translating into products and services. So you talk to the inventor. Then you assess the stage of technology and what are the next steps in getting it to the marketplace. Again, you have to talk to the inventors on that. Step three, you search for competing patents or prior art. The inventor, again, is going to be very helpful here. You identify potential markets and competing products. Your search for market information actually sounds like it's backwards. We'll talk about this. You start out with secondary research that's already been done, and you identify end users, distributors, potential licensees. And then you do primary research. That's when you start talking to the specific potential users of this technology, contacting experts and companies. Then you write the report and fill the holes if necessary. And you prepare a presentation. Your objectives: to establish a positive relationship with the inventor. Keep the door open for follow-up questions. Obtain the benefit of their thinking, because they've been thinking about this for a long time. And they know the market. They've got good insights into the market. They understand the science. They understand what it can do, how it's superior, what are the competitive approaches. Their thoughts on the most attractive applications of the technology. It may be they're spot on. On the other hand, it may be if it's a very broadly applicable technology, their ideas are not the best ones. So you want to get their help on patent searching. What are the key terms to search for? What are other terms that can capture these concepts that other people might have used? You need to get their thinking on what's the stage of development of the technology, the TRL. Their thoughts on where we go from here. How do we increase the TRL? How expensive is that going to be? Can we find the money to increase the TRL? So you've got to be well prepared with specific questions. You know, what distinguishes it from the prior art? What are the needed development time, resources, etc. Start with a bullet point summary in your head and see if it changes. And be ready to be surprised you've completely misunderstood. Don't take anything but the value of the science at face value. Be judicious with their time. So the report that we write, we start out with a technology description and the resulting products. We identify the potential benefits, potential commercial markets and the market interest, development status, ease of scale-up, technology development plan, intellectual property status of the technology, competing technologies and competitors, and the pathway to market, potential licensees, and barriers to market entry. And then we try and come up with a potential commercial rating and our recommendation. Basically, kill or go forward. So on the description of the invention, does the invention disclosure thoroughly and clearly describe the invention? What it is and how it works? Are the inventive features clearly delineated and explained? And the inventive features are what distinguish it from what came before. Do the invention features appear to be technically meaningful or significant? Not simply a distinction without a difference, but is it a difference that's going to make a difference to people? You know, if it's 10% better, is 10% a big deal in that market? Or is 10% just noise in the background and you've got to be twice as good to get away from the existing approach? You know, a must-have versus a nice-to-have. Are the superior performance features described clearly? Does it work as hoped? Patent due diligence, I'll go through this very quickly because Premnath just talked about it. Basically, this patentability, that's about us. That's about our likelihood of getting a patent on our technology issued, the prior art, the obviousness. And then you have freedom to operate. That's about them. That's what's about dominating patents that are out there, and we need to license them to be able to practice our patent. In the academic space, we normally only look at patentability. That's what we do in the first look technology assessment. Are we going to get a patent? And the freedom to operate normally is done when people want to set up a new venture. Now, if you're going to do the new venture, then you're going to have to do a freedom to operate analysis. But if you're licensing to an existing company, then you leave them to do the freedom to operate. And explicitly in your license agreements, I hope, you have a disclaimer that you are not warranting that the technology will work or that it can be practiced without infringing the rights of others. I hope your agreements have that. They're a big part of US academic licenses, And under the Universal Commercial Code, they have to be in at least 12-point font and in all caps. So you see this section in our license agreements with all caps, which is where we are limiting our liability if it don't work. Prior art searching is one of the first steps in evaluating a technology. Are we going to be able to get the right sort of patent? You should do your search yourself at the beginning. And if you decide to go ahead, then I'm sure your patent attorney will do another and perhaps better prior art search. And the patent office you submit it to will do a really, really thorough prior art search. The criteria for novelty, utility, non-obviousness, and it's novelty and non-obviousness that you're looking for. Novelty is one that scientists easily accept. They know that they will only get credit for an invention if they're the first one to do it. They have a much tougher time when the examiner comes back and says, well, I know you were the first person to clone interleukin 175, but you did exactly what people who discovered interleukin 172, 3, and 4 did, and so it was obvious to do what you did, starting with a different cell line, let's say. Okay, and academic scientists have a tough time accepting that argument. So search engines, search terms, search strategies. You can use, there are various patent offices you can use, the USPTO. Very sad, the USPTO. It had the best search capability ever. It was better than Google Patents. And about 3 years ago, they threw it away and replaced it with something that is much more difficult. At first, there weren't even any quick searches. You had to do Boolean searches for everything. And there was a big protest. I mean, I wrote to the Commissioner of Patents and so forth, and the head of the patent office. And they did go back some and introduce some simple searches, but it's still not nearly as good as it was previously. Why, if you've got something better than Google, you would throw it away, I don't know, but they did. WIPO has a pretty friendly database for searching. Where are we? The European Patent Office is pretty good. If you're in Southeast, in Central Asia, there's a Central Asian Patent Office that is pretty good. And then you have to do non-patent searches of the literature. Finding patents, these are some of the websites. This is Google Patents. This is a third-party system, Free Patents Online. I think I verified these reasonably recently. They're still around. Sometimes you need to work with your inventors for alternative terms. So we once had a invention disclosure at BU for a remote robotic operating system. Now, we all know these things where they thread a catheter through a vein or an artery. But this was something that would go into your intestines in free space. And we called it a steerable needle, didn't find much. We needed to use the term manipulator. And in the very early days of the nano technology, there was obviously no existing literature on using the word nano. And so we had something for nanowires, and we had to search for patents using the term thin channels. The names of competitor academic labs can be helpful to doing the search, and the PIs, the inventors, have the best information. And competitor companies can be helpful. Is it patentable vis-a-vis the prior art? Is there an international search report if you've done your PCT? Are there X references, which are the ones which are tough to overcome? And is there an issued or pending patent on the invention? Do the claims effectively cover the invention? You know, it's not enough just to have a patent in this space. It's got to be a patent that covers how that technology will get to the market. Will the claims be reasonably enforceable? I once had an inventor in our metabolic group. They had a way of screening for obesity drugs using brown fat. and we filed a PCT. And about 12 months, 13 months after we filed the PCT, they came to me and said, look, we've been thinking about this. The patent application tells you exactly how to do what we've invented. And if somebody else did it and came up with a candidate drug, we'd have no way of knowing how that they'd used our technology. So we want you to withhold the patent from application from publishing, and we've agreed amongst ourselves that this is not scientifically important enough, we could get a publication. So we've agreed amongst ourselves to keep it as a trade secret, and they had their own company, and we licensed that to their company. So that's one of a fairly rare situation where you can have trade secrets in academia, okay? In which countries do potential or existing patent claims exist? Are these relevant to the market for the invention? You, by and large, need to think of your patenting strategy as, if this is a patent on a product to go to market, then you need to get patents in the substantial markets for it. If, on the other hand, it's a patent on a way of manufacturing or components, then you might want to be patenting in low-cost producing countries, India, China, places like that, okay? That's how you need to broadly think strategically about your patent. And sometimes, if you can't get a patent globally for some reason, you may be able to get a utility model patent, a petty patent that might be adequate. I'm sorry, but do you have petty patents in India? No, I'm not surprised because, going back to the English origins, we don't have them in England. I know Sri Lanka doesn't, but a lot of jurisdictions do have petty patents, and you can get a patent on something that has been patented and put on sale elsewhere if it hasn't been patented and put on sale in your country, and that can be quite adequate to build a local business. If it's global, was the PCT timely filed? Are there other types of IP possible or existing? Trademarks, copyright, a plant breeder's right, trade secret, traditional knowledge. And we don't have on that list know-how. And some know-how can be very valuable. Specifically, hybridomas can be very valuable. I'm actually working on a legal dispute right now for a license agreement that was signed in 1986. And it's about an antibody that is the basis for one of the cancer tests that are very common. And because it was licensed as a monoclonal antibody, as a hybridoma, that doesn't expire. And the license agreement was as long as you're selling products. If it had been done as a patent, it would have expired 20 years ago. So this thing is ongoing. Gatorade. Do you have Gatorade in India? I'm not seeing a lot of heads, okay. Gatorade is a sports drink for hydration. It was invented at the University of Florida. And it's a long and a fascinating story I'd like to tell you, but basically, University of Florida was forced by the NIH to abandon the patent applications. And they had a trademark, and at the time, it was a trade secret formula. It wasn't a very sophisticated formula. It was glucose and salt, and then some flavoring agents to allow you to drink, because glucose isn't very sweet, so it basically tasted like seawater, and they had to mask that to come up with something. But they licensed that, and this was in 1965, and 60 years later, that is still generating about $100 million a year for the University of Florida. So some forms of intellectual property, they may not be as much valuable up front, but boy, they can go on for a very long time. And so is there potential existing bioproperty? What we call the property control position, the combination of all of these forms of IP protection. Market relevance, a two-step process. Secondary research leads to primary research. That's, I said, other people's research, stuff you can find on the internet. Primary research, my research. Assume everything exists. First search for things that destroy your opportunity, then search for things that can support it. As I said earlier, a quick kill is preferable to wasting time on a dead end. And people mistakenly tend to focus their attention on supporting evidence because people want to say yes. Whereas investors, people like that, acquirers, will look for every flaw in it and things that might kill it. And that's what we call due diligence. So these are some of the things we look at. Emerging threats, the state of the art, figures of merit, the patents, general familiarity with the space, contacts that we can talk to, technology it might synergize with, companies in the space, and existing threats. And behind each of these, your other layers. Behind the emerging threats, new science. Between the state of the art, the incumbent or emerging competitors. The figures of merit, is it faster, is it better, is it cheaper? And then behind those, the impact threshold. How much faster, how much better, how much cheaper does it have to be that people will want it? So we've done that one. Whoops. If you look at the contacts, you'll find people who can validate that this is a good technology. Down the road, they may be the people who will acquire the technology. Secondary research sources, Google. If you are at a university, your business school library may have access to all sorts of valuable databases. I'm retired from BU for many years now, but I have two major benefits. I can use my email address for life, and they have fabulous servers, and I can access their library. And that is worth an immense amount because their business school library has fabulous databases that cost a lot of money to access commercially, and for some reason these database companies give very discounted subscriptions to university libraries, I guess to get students familiar with them and used to using them. Subscription services, Frost & Sullivan, I don't know if you're familiar with this, it's a market research firm. They do studies on everything. And as I said, I get access to this through BU. Healthcare, much easier than physical sciences, IT software. The need is more obvious, and the addressable market size is easier to estimate. If you've got a cure for advanced colon cancer, it's very easy to identify the number of patients with advanced colon cancer a year that your technology can treat. The range of possible products is usually constrained. If your technology cures colon cancer, it's unlikely to work in many other cancers. I mean, there may be some that are genetically similar to work in, but it's pretty limited. But horizons vary. Drugs in academia, I mean, we're lucky if we've cured a mouse before we try to license it. So knowing the performance properties is going to be very difficult. You're going to have to make assessment assumptions about it. Devices, returns are usually lower than drugs, therefore the risk must be lower. So a 510K replacing the existing therapy has an established reimbursement code, but you're not getting superiority data. You're just showing that you are equivalent to the predicate device. In diagnostics, the market is highly competitive, many solutions, many entry points. And basically, the market is in systems that deliver these tests. And so you're going to have to convince the manufacturer of a system to include your test in their panel. And they're going to require compelling data with probably clinical samples and done prospectively. In the physical sciences, many possible products, many possible markets, and varying levels of competition. And the value chains are often not clearly defined. And market data, I think, is going to be much harder to identify than the healthcare space. You want to look at where in the supply chain your technology fits. How forward in the supply chain does the technology's value let you integrate? Because the further forward you go, the more of the value you capture. So a new material, can be used in a subcomponent, can be used in a component, can be used in a device. And most supply chains have been so disaggregated that you can usually find a contract manufacturer. So here's an example we did in my Japanese class. This university had invented an improved X-ray anode material. And as the students looked into the supply chain options, you could make the material and sell to anode manufacturers. You could make anodes and sell them to X-ray tube manufacturers. You could make X-ray tubes and sell them to X-ray system manufacturers. Or you could make and sell X-ray systems to healthcare providers. Now, is a new anode going to get us all the way to here? Unlikely, but let's see how far down the value chain it can get us. What we found was there are only a few manufacturers of X-ray systems. There's only one manufacturer and seller of X-ray tubes, and only one manufacturer of anodes. So these are the X-ray machine manufacturers, big American, European, and Japanese companies. There was one manufacturer of tubes, Varian, an American company, and they sold to Fuji, Philips, Hitachi, and Hologic. And then GE, Toshiba, and Siemens made their own tubes. And then there was only one X-ray anode manufacturer, Plancy in Austria, and of course they sold to both these three and to Varian. So your research is your only strategic options are make anodes and sell to the 4 tube manufacturers, or make the material and sell to the 1 anode manufacturer. Your licensing strategy has to be determine whether the tube manufacturers are happy with Plancy, and often, if there's a monopoly supplier, they may have irritated people over the years, upset them. There may be an opportunity. If they are happy with Plancy, then your only option is to buy a ticket to Austria and go and try sell the technology to Plancy. The value proposition, the potential for a reasonable business model, can at least one value proposition be described and substantiated for the invention in at least one market application. The value proposition is the quantitative benefit, how much more the technology is worth, less the quantifiable cost, how much it costs to implement it, the cost of what they're going to have to throw away or the investment they're going to have to make to use the new technology. And is that value proposition feasible? Can you identify at least one reasonable business model for the selected value proposition? And is this business model suitable for a disruptive paradigm shift, or revolutionary, or just an incremental invention, whether it's large or small increment? Does the combination of value proposition, market size, business model, market characteristics establish the basis for significant economic value? And will the realization of that value require a very large, a moderate, or a small investment? Will the potential return justify the investment you require? So what is the current stage of technology development of the invention? Is it an idea? Is it a test tube proof, bench test solution, extensive testing, pilot scale, beta test, in application, etc.? Where is the invention on the technology readiness level scale? What level of risk of the technology will not work as expected is it at? You guys familiar with the TRL? Funnily enough, I mean, it's an American invention, but by and large, I come across people outside the US being much more familiar with it than in the US. Developed by NASA to manage their major development projects, adopted by the US military, widely accepted, 10-point scale. Most academic inventions are at the very top, TRL1, TRL2. Here's a manufacturing readiness level. So getting from here to there, the risk reduction. What are the few next steps needed to reduce the risk to where the technology is investable? Which tends to be in the 4, 5, 6 TRL level, right? How do we get from our 2 to 3 up to 4, 5, 6? Where does the money come from? What will those risk reduction steps be relatively easy or difficult in terms of time and money? And will you be able to secure that proof of principle funding? I'd say that's one of the universal challenges facing technology transfer managers around the world. As I said yesterday, I was very lucky at BU. We had this internal fund pretty much from the inception of the tech transfer office. But it's an issue that I still don't think we've really solved in the US. I think more money available for this would go a great deal of distance towards improving our outcomes. And will the cost to de-risk the technology be justified by the potential return on the needed investment? Barriers to entry. What are the roadblocks are there between this technology and market entry? Is there a long and hard regulatory path? Is the market reluctant to adopt? Are insurance companies going to reimburse for you? Things that are preventative, for instance, are pretty difficult to get insurance companies to pay for, because they're saying, well, I may not be insuring you when I get the benefit of that preventative measure I've implemented. A lot of doctors coming up with inventions that will prevent disease from occurring as opposed to curing disease that has occurred have a very tough time understanding that. Are there entrenched players? Do you need an overwhelming sales force? Who would lose and how would they react? And how many right things have to happen for your product to be bought? And then support, funding and resources. Are there resources readily available to further develop the invention? Has the inventor got grants and funding secured to carry this forward in their lab in partnership with the licensee of the technology? Have they got money? Have they got staff, facilities? Is development funding readily available? Are there additional resources available to help the technology from its current stage to commercialization? Does the university have core facilities with the right analytical equipment, things like that, that can be used to demonstrate that the technology is going to work? Are there other pre-commercialization partners who can help with risk reduction? So can you find a foundation that focuses on this disease, that might have access to patients who have that disease, things like that? Is there a trade association that has got some funding to put into technologies that all of the people in that industry can utilize? So there's great scope for creativity in this sort of approach, looking for allies and partners to help you march down the road. So another academic partner who uses this technology, agreement lab or a government lab or NGO. And then the existing or potential for private sector partnerships. Is this technology, this is the fundamental question, is this technology going to be developed with an existing company or does it need a startup? If an existing company, who are they? How are some of those potential partners? And does the inventor have a relationship with any of these potential partners? Has he got students who, when they've graduated, have gone to work there? Has he collaborated with any of them? Things like this. Are these partnerships closely linked to the commercialization activity? If it's a startup company, is there investment interest? Is there a venture fund that is specifically interested in that area of technology? So I think you need to score each of these categories 1 to 5. 1 is very unfavorable, up to 5 very favorable. So the maximum possible will be 10 5s or 50. And this is the scoring system I used to use with these 7 factors. I gave them these weights. Ease of scale up was the one that was less. And that totals to 100. A particular technology might be you score market potential for 3, market maturity 4. So that gives you this weighted score. and the total would be 3.2 out of a maximum possible of 5. I think it's critically important in your report to explain why each score is being given. This is where you show the inventor where the weaknesses are. And you get his or her buy-in on why not to proceed. Show him where things could be improved. More reduction to practice, proof of concept. Scores tend to come out in the range of about 2 to 3. You don't get many 1s, and you certainly don't get any 5s. As I said, they're embryonic. And the value of scoring to the tech transfer office, I think, is to compare one technology with another. You have an idea that when we're above this level, it tends to be easy to find a partner, and if it's below, it's a real struggle. And it lets you prioritize your resources, and history is your guide to the future. So I would say go if it's 3.5 or more, kill if it's less than 2, conditional go, i.e. go if this applies for about 2.5 to 3.5, and then conditional kill, 2 to 2.5, we kill it unless this is the case. Okay? Did I do okay on time?
Yeah, I think all of this. Any questions for Ashley?
We used to, so the way we were structured at BU was we were in 2 halves, physical sciences, life sciences. I had a senior person and a junior person on each side. And the junior person was responsible for doing the assessments. We were getting about 2 invention disclosures a week. We kind of quickly found that this overwhelmed the ability of the junior people to do the assessments. So we used a consulting company. They were okay. We said we'll give you like 30 a year, and they guaranteed us this price. And then, as I think I said yesterday, we implemented this student analyst system where students did this, and we found they could do a good assessment in about 20 hours. And one of the, as I said, the reports they did were better than the consulting company. And one of the really big benefits of having the students do it is we had all the information sources they'd found were in-house. And so we built up a increasing background of information on these different markets.
Questions? So just as a quick add-on, we were doing in NCL, there were 2 parts to this exercise. We did, by the way, we borrowed a lot from the first look, but we did 2 parts. One was, the first question was about patentability, right? In terms of can it be patented? So that's a first, we would do that, and we would do separately the exercise on why is it attractive and to whom, right? We used to call it Form B and Form C. It's a structure for doing it, and you can imagine that just if you were to take a -1, 0, 1 kind of a scale, it's definitely no, definitely yes, and something in between, right? When we had to build a portfolio in the very beginning years, and we wanted to encourage scientists to file more, especially the younger ones, right? We had a different scale, your go, no-go scale, Ashley, right? We tweaked that around a little bit. It was less stringent in the beginning, and as many of our younger colleagues started filing and volumes increased, we started, tightening it a little bit. The Form C is the attractiveness assessment. So, we actually use some of the things that Ashley has talked about over there as well, in those as well. So, anything, your question?
Actually, not a question, but we at CSR NPL also follow a similar exercise. What we do is that we did a literature review, identified all the KPIs, and then framed a list of 23 questions. It was a mix of positive and negative questions. And then we rate all the technologies of the different PIs through a committee. We have a technology licensing committee. And based on that, we arrive at a score of 0 to 1. And then if it is above 0.6 and so, we consider it for the...
Above what?
0.6.
Okay.
0.6. And so this is how we do and identify the
But
impact
consider it
index.
for what?
Licensing, sir.
Yeah, but see, in licensing,
And or rather opportunity value also, because based on that scoring.
yeah, but see, I'll tell you, as Ashley likes to say, the real hot technology is one that has
2 companies.
2 takers.
And I didn't say that. That was Lita Nelson, who ran tech transfer at MIT for 30 years. A hot technology is one that 2 companies are interested in. And I'll tell you, in the valuation segment, when I had a white hot technology, 3 companies.
So our observation is that you don't have so many takers, and if you have a lot of takers, then you probably have something which is very already at the last stage, and you're offering non-exclusive licenses to many people who, some have already taken it to market and so on and so forth, right? So the early stage technology is actually the determinant of what is to be taken up ahead is more, it works other way around, in the sense you have interest from people, right? And then you work on it rather than so I'm just telling you that too much analysis is also not a good thing.
Paralysis by analysis.
Yeah.
Or as somebody once said, there was never a good idea that an MBA couldn't kill.
Actually, the fact was, in our CSR guideline, there is one thing mentioned that apart from cost of development, you can consider some opportunity value.
Yeah.
So during every licensing request, we were facing this issue, how to arrive at that opportunity value. So then we took up this exercise and arrived at this.
Yeah. So, by the way, this is a different matter to discuss, but there are a lot of myths that people have, right, which I think you should understand as well. And some of them are built into our guidelines as well, okay? So, for example, if you have a licensee who is willing to pay you some X amount, right, and your other choice is not get anything at all, right, will you take it or will you refuse it because it's not crossing a threshold amount?
I mean, most of these are done case to case. We receive requests.
That is what I'm trying to tell you. It's a very silly way of looking at it, and I've argued against it, saying, so there's an exercise of, they put a number to it and say only if it's above this they will license it. But what if the person is only able to do below, if your negotiated amount below, will you take it or leave it, right? It's better to have X than 0, right?
And much more important, it's important to have a licensee
A license.
who's trying to develop it
Yeah.
than it's sitting on your shelf doing nothing.
Right? And that is the key over there. So hopefully, some of you will one day change the guidelines.
We apply this for affordable healthcare technologies.
Yeah.
Giving it away for free.
Yeah.
Instead of keeping it on the shelf, just give it away for whatever it can. And
So-
maybe building on some royalty aspects later.
So there's a guy called Kevin Cullen who started out at the University of Glasgow, went to the University of New South Wales, and then went to King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia. And he came up with a concept that he called easy access IP. And he said, look, 90% of what we got ain't worth much. 10% is. We'll try and identify the 10% and do normal commercial licenses, and the 90% we will give a fully paid up license with no payments to a local startup company. So we're doing economic development. And he had data that showed that actually the University of Glasgow came out ahead because these companies would come back to the university for consulting help and for sponsored research. I got to say, he left the University of Glasgow soon afterwards, and you can look and see a lot of universities that have implemented easy access. It may or may not have been good for the university. It certainly wasn't good for the director of the Office of Technology Transfer, because the university said, well, if we're giving it away, we don't need you high-priced people, do we? I actually thought it wasn't a bad idea. I would have had an exit fee, that if the company was sold, we got a certain percentage of the proceeds. And Kevin said, yeah, I thought about that, but if I did that, I couldn't get the license agreement to 2 pages. And I want it to be on 2 pages.
Yeah. Another related thing which we should also remember is, or think about is, there are cases where people have done express agreements, right? Maybe you can talk about that as well. And that has its own benefits.
So express license agreements, these are non-negotiable licenses, okay? You have, they normally come with 2 sets of financial terms, one for life sciences, one for non-life sciences. They are very, very favorable terms to the licensee, okay? The only thing that is negotiable is the due diligence milestones that are appropriate for that technology. If you try to change one other word, the deal goes away and we go back to a traditional negotiation from scratch. So you tend to have the dynamic when the company's general counsel saying, we can't accept that, we can't accept that. And the CEO says, shut up, it's a great deal, we'll accept the risk, okay? And these have proven quite popular. They were introduced at the suggestion of the Kaufman Foundation, and a lot of universities sort of have these published on their websites for startup companies.
Okay, I think with that we'll close this particular session. Let's thank Ashley for this session as well.
So the best technology assessments I know are done by TechX. We have contracted, I advise an institution in Boston, a small dental organization that has had a lot of turnover in its tech transfer, the one person they have in it. And we've contracted with TechX, and boy, do they do good assessments.
Thank you, Dr. Ashley.
Put Ashley to it.